As I begin to recount the events that unfolded in our small California town, I can't help but feel a sense of unease creeping over me. It's been years since that fateful summer, but the memories are still as vivid as the day they were etched into my mind. My name is Sam Harper, and this is the story of how my life and the lives of everyone in our quiet community were forever changed. Our town, nestled in the heart of California's rolling hills and surrounded by dense forests, was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business. It was a double-edged sword, really. On one hand, you felt safe, protected by the watchful eyes of your neighbors. On the other, privacy was a luxury we couldn't afford. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every late-night visitor was fodder for the town gossip mill. I'd lived here my entire life, working as a local mechanic. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it suited me. I preferred the company of engines to people most days. My sister, Lisa, was always the social butterfly of the family. She ran the antique shop on Main Street, a quaint little place filled with dusty treasures and forgotten memories. Lisa had a way with people that I never possessed. She could charm the crustiest old-timer or the most suspicious newcomer with just a smile and a few well-chosen words. Our relationship had always been complicated. Growing up, we were more like oil and water than brother and sister. Lisa was the golden child, always bringing home perfect report cards and winning over our parents with her quick wit and easy laughter. I was the brooding one, the kid who preferred to tinker with broken radios in the garage rather than attend the school dances or football games. As we grew older, the rift between us only widened. Lisa went off to college, coming back with a business degree and big dreams. I stayed behind, learning the trade that would become my livelihood from old Mr. Johnson at the garage. Our paths diverged, and for years, we barely spoke beyond the obligatory holiday phone calls and awkward family dinners. That all changed when our parents died. It was sudden, a car accident on a rainy night. One moment they were here, planning their retirement and doting on their grandchildren, and the next gone. The shock of their loss brought Lisa and me back together, at least on the surface. We found ourselves thrust into a world of funeral arrangements, legal documents, and the daunting task of sorting through a lifetime of our parents' belongings. It was during this process that I first sensed something was amiss. Lisa seemed different. There was an urgency to her actions, a nervousness in her eyes that I couldn't quite place. At first, I chalked it up to grief. We all process loss differently, after all. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach refused to go away. Then came the letter. I found it tucked away in an old toolbox in Dad's workshop, a place Lisa had insisted wasn't worth going through. Just junk, she'd said, waving her hand dismissively. But something told me to look closer, and there it was, an envelope addressed to both of us in our father's neat handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it, and as I read the words on the page, I felt my world shift on its axis. The letter spoke of a family secret, a hidden inheritance that went beyond mere money or property. Our parents hinted at something valuable, something that could change everything if it fell into the wrong hands. And there in black and white was a suggestion that Lisa might not be the person I thought she was. Trust your instincts, Sam, the letter read. Your sister may have betrayed us all. Those words haunted me, echoing in my mind as I tried to reconcile the sister I knew or thought I knew with this new, potentially dangerous version of her. Had Lisa really done something to betray our family? And if so, what could be so valuable that it would drive her to such lengths? I found myself watching her more closely after that, noting the hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room, the furtive glances she cast over her shoulder as we walked down Main Street. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I was seeing Lisa, truly seeing her, for the first time in years. The antique shop took on a sinister air in my mind. What if it wasn't just a quaint business, but a front for something more nefarious? I began to wonder about the steady stream of out-of-town visitors who frequented the store, always asking for Lisa by name. Were they really interested in dusty old furniture and vintage knickknacks? Or was there something else drawing them to our sleepy little town? As the days wore on, I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on me. Should I confront Lisa? Go to the authorities? But with what evidence? A cryptic letter from our deceased parents and a gut feeling weren't exactly compelling proof of wrongdoing. And despite everything, she was still my sister. The thought of accusing her of betraying our family made my stomach churn. The tension between us grew, a palpable thing that filled the air whenever we were in the same room. Lisa must have sensed my suspicion because she began to withdraw, making excuses to avoid our weekly dinners and family gatherings. The distance between us, which had begun to close after our parents' death, yawned wide once more. It was during this time that strange things started happening around town. Old Mrs. Abernathy swore she saw lights in the abandoned mine shaft up in the hills, a place that had been closed for decades. The local kids whispered about hearing voices in the woods late at night, speaking in languages they didn't recognize. And then there were the newcomers, a steady trickle of unfamiliar faces that seemed to appear overnight, all of them somehow connected to Lisa's shop. I tried to tell myself it was all coincidence, that my overactive imagination was connecting dots that weren't really there. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The peaceful town I'd known all my life was changing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was at the center of it all. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to take a drive to clear my head. As I cruised down the empty streets, my headlights cutting through the fog that had rolled in from the hills, I found myself drawn to the antique shop. I parked across the street, intending to just sit for a moment and gather my thoughts. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement behind the shop's drawn curtains. My heart raced as I watched a shadowy figure move about inside. It was well past midnight. The shop should have been empty. Without thinking, I got out of my car and crept closer, staying in the shadows. As I neared the window, I could hear muffled voices, one of them unmistakably Lisa's. "It has to be here somewhere," I heard her say, her voice tight with frustration. "We've come too far to give up now." Another voice, deep and male, responded, but I couldn't make out the words. I inched closer, straining to hear, when suddenly a floorboard creaked beneath my feet. The voices inside fell silent instantly. Panic gripped me as I realized I'd been discovered. I turned to run, but before I could take more than a few steps, I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder. I spun around, ready to defend myself, only to find myself face to face with Lisa. Her eyes, wide with shock and something else, fear, bore into mine. "Sam," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what are you doing here?" For a moment, we stood there, frozen in time. Brother and sister, once so close, now separated by secrets and suspicion. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, to accuse her of all the things I'd been fearing. But before I could utter a word, a deafening explosion rocked the night, shattering windows and setting off car alarms up and down the street. In the chaos that followed, as sirens wailed in the distance and confused neighbors spilled out onto the sidewalks, I lost sight of Lisa. She vanished into the crowd, leaving me standing alone in front of the smoldering remains of her shop. As I stood there, watching the flames lick at the night sky, I realized that this was only the beginning. Whatever secret our parents had hinted at in their letter, whatever Lisa had gotten herself involved in, it was bigger than I could have imagined. And now, whether I liked it or not, I was part of it too. The quiet life I'd known, the simple existence of a small-town mechanic, was over. In its place was a mystery that threatened to consume not just me and Lisa, but our entire community. As I watched the fire department arrive and begin battling the blaze, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth, no matter where it led or what it cost me, for the sake of our parents' memory, for the town we called home, and yes, even for Lisa, I had to know. Little did I know that this was just the first chapter in a story that would test the bonds of family, the limits of trust, and the very fabric of reality itself. As I turned away from the burning shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the shadows of our sleepy town, ancient forces were stirring. And at the center of it all was a secret that had the power to change everything. The days following the explosion at Lisa's antique shop were a blur of police interviews, insurance claims, and whispered rumors that spread through our town like wildfire. I found myself caught in the eye of the storm, torn between my growing suspicions about Lisa and the nagging guilt that maybe, just maybe, I was letting my imagination run wild. But every time I tried to rationalize the situation, to convince myself that there must be a logical explanation for everything, the words from our parents' letter would echo in my mind. Trust your instincts, Sam. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was hiding something monumental, something that went beyond a simple family squabble or inheritance dispute. The way she'd vanished into the night after the explosion, the hushed conversations I'd overheard, the strange visitors to her shop, it all pointed to a mystery far deeper than I'd initially imagined. And so, against my better judgment, I began to dig. At first, my investigation was subtle. I'd casually bring up the subject of our parents' estate during our increasingly rare family dinners, watching Lisa's reactions carefully. She'd brush off my questions with a smile and a change of subject, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes would dart away when the conversation veered too close to sensitive topics. It was like watching a master performer on stage, every movement calculated to deflect and distract. As the weeks wore on, my approach became less subtle. I found myself rifling through Lisa's belongings when she wasn't home, searching for any clue that might shed light on what she was hiding. I told myself it was for her own good, that I was protecting her from whatever trouble she'd gotten herself into. But deep down, I knew I was crossing a line. One afternoon, while Lisa was meeting with the insurance adjuster about her shop, I snuck into her apartment above the now-shuttered store. The place was a mess, boxes half-packed and paper strewn about, as if she'd been preparing to leave in a hurry. As I sifted through the chaos, my heart pounding with the fear of discovery, I came across something that made my blood run cold. A small, leather-bound book tucked beneath a stack of old magazines. It was our mother's diary. With trembling hands, I opened it, knowing I was about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. The pages were filled with our mother's elegant handwriting, detailing years of family history, hopes, and secrets. But it was an entry from just a few months before her death that caught my eye. We can't keep this from the children any longer. The burden is too great, the stakes too high. Lisa knows more than she lets on. I've seen the way she looks at us when she thinks we're not watching. But Sam, oh, my sweet, trusting Sam, how can we tell him that everything he believes about our family is a lie? I staggered back, the diary clutched to my chest, my mind reeling. What did it mean? What lie had I been living? And how was Lisa involved? The questions swirled in my head, a maelstrom of confusion and betrayal. In that moment, all my suspicions crystallized into a single, terrible certainty. Lisa had known something all along, something that could tear our family and possibly our entire town apart. From that day forward, my obsession with uncovering the truth consumed me. I neglected my work at the garage, spending hours poring over old family photos, documents, anything that might give me a clue. I started following Lisa, watching her every move, convinced that at any moment she might lead me to the answers I so desperately sought. My behavior didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who had known me all my life began to give me a wide berth on the street. Old friends stopped calling. Even my most loyal customers at the garage started taking their business elsewhere. I knew I was becoming the town pariah, the crazy Harper boy who'd finally lost his marbles. But I couldn't bring myself to care. The truth was all that mattered now. Lisa, for her part, seemed to withdraw further into herself with each passing day. The vibrant, outgoing sister I'd known was replaced by a shadow, a woman who moved through life as if she was constantly looking over her shoulder. When we did speak, our conversations were strained, filled with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. I tried to confront her once, cornering her outside the grocery store on a busy Saturday morning. What are you hiding, Lisa? I demanded, my voice louder than I'd intended. What did Mom and Dad tell you that was so terrible you had to keep it from me? Lisa's face paled, her eyes darting around at the curious onlookers who had stopped to watch the scene unfold. Sam, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Not here. Not like this. You don't understand what you're asking. But I was beyond reason at that point. Don't I? I shot back. I understand that you've been lying to me, to everyone in this town. I found Mom's diary, Lisa. I know there's something you're not telling me. For a moment, I saw real fear flash in Lisa's eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a steely resolve I'd never seen in her before. You're right, Sam, she said quietly. There are things you don't know, things I've been trying to protect you from. But if you keep pushing like this, you're going to put us all in danger. Please, for once in your life, trust me and let this go. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there surrounded by whispers and stares. I wanted to run after her, to shake the truth out of her if I had to, but something in her words gave me pause. Danger? What kind of secret could be so terrible that it put us all at risk? As the summer wore on, the tension in our little town reached a fever pitch. It wasn't just between Lisa and me anymore. It seemed like everyone was on edge, jumping at shadows and speaking in hushed tones. Strange cars with out-of-state plates began appearing on our streets, their occupants watching the town with cold, calculating eyes. The old mine shaft that had been abandoned for decades suddenly became a hive of activity, with trucks coming and going at all hours of the night. Through it all, I kept digging, piecing together fragments of information from old newspaper clippings, town records, and overheard conversations. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, one of a town built on secrets, of a family legacy that went back generations. I learned of an ancient artifact, supposedly hidden somewhere in the hills surrounding our town, an object of immense power that had been guarded by select families for centuries. And at the center of it all was the Harper family. Our family. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was the inheritance our parents had hinted at, the secret that Lisa had been burdened with. It wasn't about money or property. It was about a responsibility passed down through the ages, a duty to protect something beyond our understanding. As the pieces fell into place, I began to see Lisa's actions in a new light, her secretive behavior, her reluctance to share information. It wasn't betrayal, it was protection. She'd been trying to shield me from a truth that she knew would change everything, but it was too late. My relentless pursuit of the truth had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. The night I made this realization, I raced to Lisa's apartment, desperate to apologize, to tell her I finally understood. But when I arrived, the door was ajar, the rooms ransacked, and Lisa was gone. On her bedside table, I found a hastily scrawled note. Sam, if you're reading this, it means they've found us. I'm sorry for everything. Find the key. Trust no one. I'll contact you when it's safe. I love you, brother. As I stood there, clutching Lisa's note, I heard car doors slamming outside and footsteps approaching the apartment. I knew in that moment that my old life was over. Whatever destiny our family had been running from for generations had finally caught up to us. With my heart pounding, I slipped out the back window and into the night, Lisa's words ringing in my ears. Find the key. Trust no one. The hunt for the truth had led me down a rabbit hole deeper than I could have ever imagined, and now there was no turning back. As I disappeared into the shadows of our once quiet town, I realized that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test not only the bonds of family, but the very nature of reality itself. The sleepy California town I'd called home all my life was about to become the epicenter of a conflict centuries in the making. And I, Sam Harper, the unremarkable small-town mechanic, was now at the heart of it all. With Lisa gone and enemies closing in, I had no choice but to unravel the mystery that had consumed our family for generations. Little did I know that the path ahead would lead me to places I never thought existed. forced me to question everything I believed to be true, and ultimately decide the fate of not just our town, but possibly the entire world. As I melted into the darkness, one thought echoed in my mind. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. I never thought it would come to this. As I stood in the dusty living room of our childhood home, my heart pounding and hands shaking, I couldn't believe how far we'd fallen. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now stood as a silent witness to the unraveling of our family. The air was thick with tension and the ghosts of happier times. Lisa stood across from me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. I could see the sister I once knew, the one who used to chase away the monsters under my bed, but she was obscured by the weight of secrets and lies. In my hands, I clutched the diary and letters that had become my obsession, my proof of her betrayal. How could you? I spat, my voice trembling with rage. All this time, you've been lying to me, stealing what's rightfully ours. Lisa took a step back, her hands raised in a placating gesture. Sam, please, she pleaded. You're not thinking clearly. Whatever you think you've found, it's not what you think. Let me explain, Dash. But I was beyond explanations. Weeks of paranoia and sleepless nights had taken their toll, and I could no longer distinguish between reality and the twisted narrative I'd constructed in my mind. Explain, I laughed bitterly. Explain how you've been hiding our inheritance, how you betrayed our family. I waved the diary in front of her face, watching as the color drained from her cheeks. It's all here, Lisa. Mom knew. She knew you were up to something, and now I know too. Lisa's expression shifted from fear to determination. She straightened her spine and looked me directly in the eye. You're right, Sam. There are things I've been hiding, but not for the reasons you think. If you'd just listened, Dash. But I was done listening. Years of resentment, of feeling second best, of suspecting I was somehow less than, all came bubbling to the surface. Before I knew what was happening, I had crossed the room and grabbed Lisa's arm, harder than I'd ever touched her before. No more lies, I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty house. Tell me the truth. What happened next was a blur of motion and emotion. Lisa, reacting to my aggression, pushed back. I stumbled, knocking over an old side table. The crash seemed to shatter something between us, and suddenly we were grappling with each other like we never had before. It wasn't a fight born of skill or strategy, but of raw, primal emotion. Years of unspoken grievances exploding in a cacophony of shouts and flailing limbs. As we struggled, I felt my foot catch on something, a loose floorboard that had always been there, that we'd always avoided as kids. But now, in the heat of our fight, it gave way entirely. I fell back, dragging Lisa with me, and we both watched in stunned silence as the old wood splintered, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. For a moment, our fight forgotten, we stared at the dark space beneath the floor. Then, moving as if in a trance, I reached in and pulled out a small metal box, a safe I'd never known existed. My hands trembled as I turned it over, seeing the combination lock that stood between me and what I was sure would be the final piece of the puzzle. Lisa's voice, suddenly small and defeated, broke the silence. Sam, please, don't open that. You don't understand what you're about to do. But I was beyond reason. With shaking fingers, I input the combination, our parents' anniversary date, and felt a sick sense of triumph as the lock clicked open. Inside, I found a stack of documents, yellow with age but meticulously preserved. Birth certificates, legal papers, and at the bottom, a letter addressed to both of us in our father's handwriting. As I unfolded the letter, Lisa sank to her knees beside me, her face a mask of resignation and sorrow. I began to read, my world tilting on its axis with each word. My dear children, the letter began. If you're reading this, then the truth we've tried so hard to protect you from has finally come to light. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll be direct. Sam, I am not your biological father. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me. I wanted to stop reading, to pretend I'd never seen those words, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The letter went on to explain a story I could barely comprehend. A love affair, a moment of weakness, a decision made to keep a family together. My mother, pregnant with another man's child, and my father, the man I'd always called Dad, choosing to raise me as his own. We made this choice out of love, the letter continued. For you, Sam, and for our family, we hope to take this secret to our graves. But we realized that wasn't fair to either of you. Lisa, we entrusted you with this knowledge when you were old enough to understand, swearing you to secrecy until the time was right. We hope you can forgive us for burdening you with this truth. I looked up from the letter to see Lisa, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Sam, she whispered. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I promised Mom and Dad. I thought I was protecting you. The room seemed to close in around me. Every memory, every moment of my life was suddenly cast in a new light. The times I'd felt like an outsider in my own family, the subtle differences in how our parents treated Lisa and me, it all made a terrible kind of sense now. Why? I choked out, my voice barely audible. Why keep this from me? Why lie for so long? Lisa moved closer, reaching out to touch my arm, but I flinched away. They were afraid, she said softly. Afraid of losing you, of breaking apart our family. And later, they were afraid of how you'd react. You were always so sensitive, so quick to anger. They didn't want to hurt you. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, harsh and bitter. Didn't want to hurt me? By lying to me my entire life? By making you complicit in their deception? The weight of the truth crashed down on me, and with it came a tidal wave of emotions I couldn't begin to process. Anger at the lies, grief for the father I'd lost twice over, betrayal by the sister I'd accused of the very thing she'd been tasked to protect me from. It was too much. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the suspicion, all the paranoia that had been building over the past weeks found a new target. Not Lisa, not our parents, but myself. I was the lie, the intruder in my own family story. I stood abruptly, the documents scattering across the floor. Lisa reached for me, her face etched with concern, but I backed away. Sam, please, she begged. Let's talk about this. We can figure it out together. But I was already moving, stumbling towards a door. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I needed to get out, to run from this house and the shattered remains of the life I thought I knew. As I burst out into the fading daylight, I heard Lisa calling after me, her voice breaking with emotion. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran, with no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to escape. The quiet streets of our town blurred past me as I ran, my mind a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and emotions. Everything I believed about myself, about my family, about my place in the world, it was all built on a foundation of lies. And now that foundation had crumbled, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the familiar landscape, I found myself at the edge of town, staring out at the dense forest that had always marked the boundary of our little world. In that moment, with the truth of my origins burning in my chest, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't stay here, couldn't face Lisa or the pitying looks of neighbors who would inevitably learn the truth. I needed answers, needed to understand who I really was and where I came from. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that those answers wouldn't be found in the town that had been my home for so long. As I took my first steps into the gathering darkness of the forest, leaving behind everything I'd ever known, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The revelation of my true parentage wasn't the end of the mystery. It was the key that unlocked the door to something much bigger, much more dangerous than I could have imagined. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of secrets yet to be uncovered, and truths yet to be faced. And as I disappeared into the shadows, I knew that the Sam Harper who emerged on the other side of this journey would be a very different man from the one who entered. The game had changed, the stakes raised higher than ever before. And somewhere out there, in the vast unknown, lay the answers I so desperately sought. About my past, my family, and the true nature of the legacy I'd unwittingly inherited. With each step into the unknown, I left behind the life I'd known, embarking on a quest that would test not just the bonds of family, but the very fabric of reality itself. I understand you'd like me to develop a long, fluid text of at least 5,000 characters that is engaging and maintains the reader's interest. The text should be written continuously without breaks, with all numbers spelled out in words. You've asked for it to be written in the first person, in American English, and to be based on the provided outline for Chapter 4, Climax. I'll create this text for you now, incorporating the key events and emotions described in your outline. My hands trembled as I gripped the cold metal of the gun I'd found in our family's safe. The weight of it felt foreign and terrifying in my palm, but the rage coursing through my veins overshadowed any hesitation I might have felt. My sister Lisa stood before me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, her hands raised in a futile attempt to protect herself. The isolated house that had once been our sanctuary now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on us as the air grew thick with tension and the echoes of our screams. I couldn't believe how quickly everything had unraveled. Just hours ago, we'd been sitting at the kitchen table, sharing a meal and reminiscing about our childhood. But then Lisa had let slip a secret she'd been harboring for years, a truth so devastating it shattered the very foundation of our relationship. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, leaving me reeling and desperate for some way to make sense of this new reality. As I advanced towards Lisa, my vision blurred by tears of anger and betrayal. I barely recognized myself. This wasn't who I was supposed to be. I was Sam, the protective older brother, the one who had always looked out for his little sister. But in that moment, all I could see was the person who had lied to me for so long, who had kept this earth-shattering secret hidden away while I lived in blissful ignorance. Lisa's voice, usually so strong and confident, now quivered as she pleaded with me. "Sam, please," she begged. "Put the gun down. We can talk about this. I know you're hurt and angry, but this isn't the way." Her words barely registered through the roaring in my ears. How could we possibly talk about this? How could any amount of explanation justify what she had done? I watched as if from outside my own body as Lisa made a desperate lunge for the door. In that split second, something inside me snapped. Without conscious thought, my fingers squeezed the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the living room, and time seemed to stand still as I watched my sister crumple to the floor. The silence that followed was more oppressive than any noise could have been. I stood there, frozen, the gun slipping from my nerveless fingers and clattering to the hardwood floor. What had I done? This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare. But as I stared at Lisa's motionless form, the truth of what had just transpired began to sink in. I fell to my knees beside her, my hands shaking as I reached out to touch her. "Lisa," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Lisa, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Oh, God, what have I done?" But there was no response. My sister, my best friend, the person I had sworn to protect, lay still and silent, her life extinguished by my own hand. The weight of my actions crashed down upon me like a physical force, threatening to crush me beneath its enormity. How had we come to this? How had a lifetime of love and shared experiences led to this moment of unthinkable violence? I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room spun around me as wave after wave of guilt and horror washed over me. In a daze, I stumbled to my feet and fled the house. I couldn't bear to look at what I had done, couldn't face the reality of the life I had just taken. The cool night air hit my face as I burst out the back door, but it did nothing to clear my head. I ran blindly into the forest behind our house, branches whipping at my face and tearing at my clothes. I didn't care. Physical pain was nothing compared to the agony tearing through my soul. I don't know how long I ran or how far I went. Time lost all meaning as I stumbled through the darkness, my mind replaying those final moments with Lisa over and over again. Her pleading eyes, the sound of the gunshot, the terrible finality of her fall. Each memory was like a knife twisting in my gut, a constant reminder of the unforgivable act I had committed. Eventually, I collapsed against a tree, my legs no longer able to support me. I slid down to the forest floor, my back against the rough bark, and finally allowed the tears to come. They flowed freely, hot and bitter, as I sobbed into the uncaring night. What kind of monster was I? How could I have done this to my own sister? As I sat there, lost in my grief and self-loathing, I became aware of voices in the distance. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, accompanied by the crunch of leaves underfoot. The police. Of course. In my panic, I hadn't even considered that someone might have heard the gunshot or Lisa's screams. A small, cowardly part of me wanted to run deeper into the forest, to hide from what I had done. But I knew it was pointless. There was no escaping this. I didn't resist when they found me. I didn't say a word as they read me my rights and cuffed my hands behind my back. What could I possibly say that would make any of this right? As they led me out of the forest and back towards the house, I caught glimpses of my neighbors standing in their yards, watching with a mixture of horror and fascination. I wonder what they were thinking. Did they see me as the monster I now knew myself to be? The ride to the police station passed in a blur. I stared out the window, not really seeing the familiar streets of our small town as they slid by. How many times had I driven these same roads with Lisa, laughing and singing along to the radio? Those memories, once so precious, now felt like they belonged to someone else, to a version of myself that no longer existed. At the station, I was led to an interrogation room. The harsh fluorescent lights hurt my eyes after the darkness of the forest, and I blinked rapidly as I tried to adjust. A detective entered, his face grim as he sat down across from me. He asked me if I understood why I was there, if I knew what I had done. I nodded mutely. There was no point in denying it. As the detective began to question me, I found myself speaking almost mechanically, recounting the events of the evening in a flat, emotionless voice. It was as if I were describing something that had happened to someone else, some tragic story I had read in a newspaper. But with each word, the reality of my actions sank deeper into my consciousness. I told them about the argument, about finding the gun, about the moment of blind rage that had led me to pull the trigger. I couldn't bring myself to look at the detective's face as I spoke. I didn't want to see the judgment in his eyes, the disgust that I knew must be there. Because no matter what he thought of me, I knew it couldn't be worse than what I thought of myself. As I finished my statement, a terrible silence fell over the room. The detective cleared his throat, shuffled some papers, and then asked me if I had anything else to add. I shook my head. What else was there to say? No words could undo what I had done, could bring Lisa back or erase the pain I had caused. In that moment, sitting in that cold, sterile room, the full weight of my future crashed down upon me. I would spend years, perhaps the rest of my life, behind bars. I would be labeled a murderer, a man who had taken his own sister's life in a moment of uncontrolled anger. Our parents, already devastated by the loss of their daughter, would have to grapple with the knowledge that their son was responsible. But even as these thoughts swirled through my mind, I knew that no punishment the justice system could devise would be as severe as the one I had already sentenced myself to. The guilt, the regret, the endless replaying of those final moments with Lisa, these would be my constant companions for the rest of my days. As they led me to a holding cell, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. I hardly recognized the man staring back at me. His eyes were hollow, haunted by the weight of what he had done. In that moment, I realized that the person I had been before pulling that trigger was gone forever. Sam, the loving brother, the good son, the man with a bright future ahead of him. He had died in that living room along with Lisa. Now, all that remained was a shell, a cautionary tale of how quickly anger and impulsive actions can destroy everything you hold dear. As the cell door clanged shut behind me, I sank onto the narrow cot and closed my eyes. But I knew sleep would not come. How could it, when every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa's face in those final moments? In the quiet of the cell, I found myself whispering an apology into the darkness. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm so sorry." But I knew it was too late for apologies. Too late for forgiveness. Too late for anything but the long, lonely road of regret that stretched out before me. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the small window of my cell, I realized that this was the beginning of my new reality. A reality shaped by one terrible moment of lost control, a split second that had changed everything forever. And as I sat there, waiting for whatever would come next, I knew that no matter what happened, no matter how many years passed, I would never escape the memory of what I had done. It would be my burden to bear, my cross to carry, for the rest of my days. The weight of my actions settled over me like a shroud, and I knew that from this moment on, every breath I took would be a reminder of the life I had taken, the trust one had shattered, and the future I had destroyed. This was my legacy now, a cautionary tale of how quickly anger can consume us, how one moment of weakness can lead to a lifetime of regret. And as the world outside my cell began to wake up to a new day, I closed my eyes and silently begged for a forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve and would likely never receive. The world around me had become a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes, as if I were viewing everything through a thick fog. Days passed in a haze of interrogations, legal proceedings, and sleepless nights in a cold cell. The reality of what I had done still felt like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up, but the harsh fluorescent lights of the county jail and the constant clanging of metal doors served as brutal reminders that this was indeed my new reality. I could hear the whispers and feel the stares of the other inmates as I was led through the corridors. Even here, among those who had committed their own crimes, I was viewed as something different, something worse. The man who killed his own sister. The thought made me sick to my stomach, and I found myself retreating further into my own mind, desperately trying to escape the crushing weight of guilt that threatened to suffocate me. Outside the walls of my confinement, I knew our small town was in an uproar. Mayfield had always been a quiet place, where the most exciting news was usually about the high school football team's latest victory or Mrs. Johnson's prize-winning tomatoes at the county fair. Now, our family's tragedy had become the center of a media frenzy. I could imagine the hushed conversations in the grocery store aisles, the speculative glances exchanged over fences, the way our neighbors who had known us for years were suddenly re-examining every interaction they'd ever had with the Harper family. During my initial interrogation, I had been too shocked, too numb to fully process what was happening. But as the days wore on and the fog of disbelief began to lift, the reality of my situation started to sink in. The detectives' questions became more pointed, more specific. They wanted to know about the argument that had led to that fatal moment. They pressed for details about our family dynamics, about any tensions or conflicts that might have existed beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. At first, I tried to protect what was left of our family's privacy, but as the investigation progressed and more evidence came to light, I realized that the truth would come out one way or another. So, slowly, haltingly, I began to reveal the secrets that had been festering within our family for years. I told them about the night Lisa had confessed to me, about the earth-shattering revelation that had turned my world upside down. I spoke of the anger and betrayal I had felt upon learning that the man I had called Dad for my entire life wasn't my biological father. The words came out in a torrent, as if by speaking them aloud, I could somehow lessen their power over me. As I talked, I could see the expressions on the detectives' faces change. The initial skepticism and judgment gave way to something that looked almost like pity. They had seen countless family tragedies in their careers, but there was something about our story that seemed to affect them on a deeper level. It was during one of these interrogation sessions that they told me about the documents they had found in our family's safe. bank statements, old letters, and a paternity test that confirmed what Lisa had told me that fateful night. Seeing the evidence laid out before me in black and white made it all feel so much more real, so much more painful. The detectives explained that Lisa had known about my true parentage for years. She had discovered the truth accidentally while going through some old papers and had been grappling with whether or not to tell me ever since. They speculated that her guilt over keeping this secret, combined with her fear of how I might react, had led to the tension between us in recent months. As I listened to them piece together the puzzle of our family's history, I felt a fresh wave of grief and regret wash over me. If only Lisa had felt she could confide in me earlier. If only I had been more understanding, more open to hearing her out. If only, if only, if only. The phrase echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of all the ways things could have been different. The trial, when it finally came, felt like some sort of surreal theater. I sat in the courtroom, listening as lawyers argued about my state of mind, about the circumstances that had led to that terrible moment. Character witnesses were called, neighbors, teachers, old friends, who painted a picture of me as a good person who had made a terrible mistake. But I knew, as I sat there in my ill-fitting suit, that no amount of positive testimony could erase what I had done. I pleaded guilty. How could I not? There was no denying what had happened, no way to justify my actions. As I stood before the judge and admitted my crime, I could feel the weight of the entire courtroom's gaze upon me. In that moment, I wasn't just confessing to the court. I was confessing to our entire town, to everyone who had ever known and trusted me. The sentence, when it was handed down, felt both too harsh and not harsh enough. 25 years to life. The words echoed in my ears as the bailiff led me away. A quarter of a century, at minimum, locked away from the world. It seemed an eternity, and yet, wasn't Lisa's life worth more than that? As I was led out of the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of my parents. My mother, our mother, was sobbing quietly, her face buried in her hands. My father, the man who had raised me, regardless of biology, stood stoically beside her, his face a mask of grief and disappointment. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and in that look, I saw a lifetime of love and shared memories crumble to dust. The days and weeks that followed my sentencing passed in a monotonous blur. Life in prison was a far cry from the comfortable existence I had known in Mayfield. The constant noise, the lack of privacy, the ever-present threat of violence. It was a world I never could have imagined being a part of. And yet, here I was, inmate number 46287, just another face in a sea of orange jumpsuits. In the quiet hours of the night, when the cell block finally fell silent, I found myself reliving that fateful night over and over again. I thought about Lisa, about the life she would never get to live. I thought about our parents, left childless in the span of a single evening. And I thought about our town, forever changed by the tragedy that had unfolded within its borders. Mayfield had always prided itself on being a close-knit community, a place where everyone knew their neighbors and looked out for one another. But the Harper family's secrets had shattered that illusion of small-town perfection. Now, I imagined people would look at their neighbors differently, wondering what dark secrets might be lurking behind closed doors. As the years began to pass, I received occasional news from the outside world. Our parents had moved away, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss. The house where we had grown up, where the tragedy had unfolded, had been sold to a young couple from out of state who knew nothing of its history. Life in Mayfield, it seemed, was slowly returning to normal. But for me, there would never be a return to normalcy. Each day in prison was a reminder of what I had done, of the life I had taken, and the future I had thrown away. I threw myself into every program the prison offered, anger management, counseling, education courses, desperately seeking some way to atone for my actions. In my darkest moments, I found myself wondering if Lisa could see me now. What would she think of what I had become? Would she be able to forgive me? Or would she be as disgusted and horrified as I was with myself? These thoughts haunted me, driving me to strive for some form of redemption, even if I knew deep down that true forgiveness was beyond my reach. As I approach the end of my minimum sentence, I find myself filled with a mixture of hope and dread. The world outside these walls has changed so much in the past 25 years. I've changed too, in ways I'm only beginning to understand. The angry, impulsive young man who pulled that trigger no longer exists. In his place is someone older, wiser, and infinitely more aware of the consequences of his actions. But no matter how much time passes, no matter how much I change, I know that I will always carry the weight of what I did. Lisa's life, cut short by my hand, will forever be a part of me. Her unrealized potential, her dreams, her future, all of it lost because of one moment of uncontrolled rage. As I prepare for the possibility of rejoining society, I find myself wondering what kind of life awaits me on the outside. Will I be able to find a place for myself in a world that has moved on without me? Will I ever be able to look at myself in the mirror without seeing a murder staring back? These are questions I may soon have to face. But for now, as I sit in my cell writing these words, I can only hope that by sharing my story, I might prevent someone else from making the same terrible mistake. If there's one thing I've learned in all these years of reflection and regret, it's that no secret, no betrayal, no moment of anger is worth the cost of a human life. To Lisa, wherever she may be, I can only say once again how deeply sorry I am. And to anyone who might be facing their own moments of rage or betrayal, I beg you to stop, to breathe, to think before you act. Because in the end, the price of unchecked anger is far too high, and the weight of regret is a burden that never truly lifts. As I sit here, penning these final thoughts, I can't help but reflect on the twisted path that led me to this point. The weight of my actions, the irreversible consequences of a single moment of blind rage, continue to press down upon me with an almost physical force. It's been years since that fateful night, yet the memory remains as vivid and painful as if it happened yesterday. The image of Lisa's face, frozen in that final moment of fear and disbelief, is seared into my mind, a constant reminder of the terrible price we both paid for the secrets that tore our family apart. Looking back, I can see now how we were all victims in our own way, victims of lies, of misplaced loyalty, of the misguided belief that keeping secrets could somehow protect those we loved. Our parents, in their attempt to shield me from a truth they thought would hurt me, set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately destroy us all. Lisa, burdened with knowledge she never asked for, struggled under the weight of a secret that was never hers to bear. And I, blissfully ignorant until that final, terrible revelation, allowed my anger and sense of betrayal to override everything else. My love for my sister, my own moral compass, the very essence of who I thought I was. The irony is not lost on me that in my quest for truth, in my rage at having been lied to for so long, I committed an act that dwarfed any deception our family had ever known. The loss of a life, my sister's life, at my own hands. It's a debt I can never repay, a wrong I can never right. The punishment handed down by the court, the years I've spent behind bars, pale in comparison to the life sentence of guilt and regret I've imposed upon myself. In the quiet hours of the night, when sleep eludes me and the ghosts of the past come calling, I often find myself wondering about the what-ifs. What if our parents had been honest from the beginning? What if Lisa had felt she could confide in me earlier? What if I had taken a moment to breathe, to think, before reaching for that gun? The possibilities of a different outcome torment me, each imagined scenario a cruel reminder of the future we'll never have. But dwelling on these alternate realities serves no purpose other than to deepen the well of regret I've been drowning in for years. The harsh truth is that we can't change the past. We can only learn from it, hope to grow from our mistakes, and try to forge a path forward that honors the memory of those we've lost. In sharing this story, as painful as it is, I hope to serve as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the destructive power of secrets, of unresolved anger, of the terrible consequences that can arise when we allow our emotions to override our humanity. It's a lesson I learned far too late, at a cost far too high. To those who might find themselves standing at a similar crossroads, teetering on the edge of an abyss of anger and betrayal, I implore you, step back. Take a breath. Remember that no matter how deep the hurt, how bitter the betrayal, there is always another way. Violence solves nothing. It only begets more pain, more loss, more regret. I think about the ripple effects of that night, how the consequences of my actions spread far beyond just Lisa and me. Our parents, left childless and broken, their lives forever altered by a tragedy they never could have foreseen. Our small town, its sense of safety and community shattered by the knowledge that such violence could erupt in their midst. Friends, neighbors, acquaintances, all left to grapple with the shocking reality of what had transpired behind closed doors. The truth is, when we harbor secrets, when we allow resentment and anger to fester, we're not just hurting ourselves. We're creating a toxic environment that can poison everything and everyone around us. In our family's case, the secrets our parents kept, thinking they were protecting me, instead laid the groundwork for an unimaginable tragedy. Lisa's decision to keep the truth from me, born out of love and a desire to maintain family harmony, ultimately led to a confrontation that ended her life. And my own inability to process my emotions, to see past my immediate anger and sense of betrayal, led me to commit an act so heinous, so contrary to everything I believed about myself, that I'm still struggling to reconcile with the person I thought I was. If there's one lesson to be taken from our tragic story, it's the vital importance of honesty, communication, and forgiveness within families. Secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, have a way of growing, of taking on a life of their own. They create barriers between loved ones, foster mistrust, and can ultimately lead to irreparable damage. I often wonder what might have happened if we'd all just been honest with each other from the beginning. If our parents had trusted in the strength of our family bond to weather the truth about my parentage. If Lisa had felt she could come to me with the burden of knowledge she carried. If I had taken the time to listen, to understand, instead of reacting with blind fury, perhaps, in that alternate reality, we would still be a family. Lisa would still be alive, pursuing her dreams, lighting up the world with her smile. Our parents would be looking forward to grandchildren, to family gatherings filled with laughter instead of marked by absence. And I would be free, not just from the physical confines of this prison, but from the crushing weight of guilt and regret that has become my constant companion. But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it, grow from it, and hope that by sharing our stories, we might prevent others from making the same devastating mistakes. So I share this painful tale, bearing the darkest moments of my life, in the hope that it might serve as a beacon of warning to others, to families harboring secrets. Find the courage to be honest, to trust in the love that binds you together. To those grappling with anger and betrayal, seek help. Find healthy ways to process your emotions. Remember that violence is never the answer. And to everyone, cherish your loved ones, communicate openly and honestly, forgive when you can, and never take for granted the precious gift of family. As for me, I continue to grapple with the consequences of my actions every day. The path of redemption, if such a thing is even possible for someone like me, is long and arduous. But I am committed to walking it, step by painful step. I owe it to Lisa's memory, to the family we once were, and to the person I hope to become. In the end, our story is a tragedy born of secrets, nurtured by misunderstanding, and culminating in an act of violence that can never be undone. It's a stark reminder of how the past can shape our present in ways we never anticipated, and how the choices we make in moments of high emotion can alter the course of not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone around us. As I close this chapter of reflection, I am left with a profound sense of loss, regret, and a desperate hope that our family's tragedy might serve some greater purpose. If even one person reads this and chooses a different path, if one family decides to confront their secrets head-on rather than letting them fester, then perhaps some small measure of meaning can be found in our loss. To Lisa, my sister, my friend, the innocent victim of a tragedy that should never have happened, I'm sorry. Your life was cut short by my actions, and no amount of remorse can ever make that right. But I promise to spend every day I have left honoring your memory, striving to be the kind of person you always believed I could be. Your light may have been extinguished far too soon, but I hope that through sharing our story, it might continue to shine, guiding others away from the dark path I chose. And to anyone reading this, remember that family is precious, that honesty is vital, and that no secret is worth the price we paid. Learn from our mistakes, cherish your loved ones, and always choose love over anger. In the end, it's not the secrets we keep, but the connections we nurture that truly define us.